Welcome to Decoding Leadership, where we break down the elements of humane and effective leadership. I'm your host, Jade Rubik. I'm really happy to introduce you to Margaret Lee. Margaret's had a distinguished career. She was a software engineer for 10 to 12 years before moving to management at New Relic. That's where I got to meet her. She then went on to be a senior engineering manager at Heroku and Slack. And most recently, she's been VP of engineering at Facet. So she has just a real depth of experience that she brings to bear. And I'm really excited to explore these topics together and introduce you to Margaret. Welcome to the show, Margaret. It's
Thank you.
nice to see you again. And today, I think we're going to cover two different topics. The first is the engineering leader's role in technical direction and also building teams and culture. So I'm really excited to get into this, and nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jade.
Let's start with the topic of technical direction. And can you define what you mean by technical direction?
I think I'm going to start off defining technical direction by first defining technical vision. Technical vision is this North Star of where you want the engineering organization to go. And to me, technical direction is the implementation of that, is the operationalizing of that, is the execution of that. And so I'll give you an example. I worked with the CTO at a creative tools company that did a lot of work with AI. His expertise was in computer vision. So he had a lot of knowledge around what was trending, what was emerging, and he understood where he wanted to take the product in terms of the capabilities that we needed from a technical perspective. Luckily for me, that I had him to work with because my job, my role as the VP of engineering was to take his technical vision and create a roadmap and set the technical direction. And so for me, the technical direction is really the how. How do we make the technical vision happen? One of the things that happens, especially with folks that are moving into more senior leadership roles, is there's this notion that technical direction means you are making all of the decisions about how to get things done. And I kind of want to absolve fellow engineering leaders of that weight. How I think of it is when you're owning technical direction, you're really owning making something happen, right? For me, that just means gathering enough of the information that you need to come to a conclusion about where you're going to go, building out that roadmap. There's this heaviness in being the ultimate decision maker, but there are a number of ways to tackle that. The way I've had it work best for me is delegating, this idea of making recommendations and then having them bring those recommendations back and then doing my due diligence in sussing out whether there are any major gaps that I can see from those recommendations. But but I think that essentially is how I view owning technical direction. And once I realized that it wasn't all on me to do the research, to do the proof of concepts, to do the technical design documents, the recommendation and proposals. Once I understood that and realized that what I really owned was making things happen and making sure that I've vetted the suggestions and understood the ramifications of any decisions that we make, the pros and cons, what we're missing if we do make certain decisions versus not making decisions. I think that that really helped smooth out execution just in general.
This seems to me to be an outcome focused approach. It's like you're responsible for driving certain outcomes. How do you monitor that or ensure that you're getting the results that you're looking for?
Great question. So I find it very helpful to time box explorations into solutions. I make it clear what my expectation is for what the artifact is that comes out of those explorations. That artifact is often a recommendation of which path to take and the pros and cons of taking each path. There is often some review of that recommendation. There might be some back and forth, either synchronously or asynchronously in a technical design document. Often, my expectation also from the recommendations thing is some proof of concept. The reason why I like to time box it is because it is easy to get into this perfection being the enemy of state, where people will go down many, many, many paths in search of some solution. And so when you time box it and you make it clear what the expectations are of that initial artifact, it really helps them to propel how should I be thinking about this? What should I be optimizing for in this case? From there, I like to make the decision very quickly to move forward. And I think that comes from my experience in the startup world in terms of putting out some type of MVP in order to really exercise what you want to learn. It's crucial that there is accountability at the different phases that you think are important. Sometimes you may just delegate the task and let them execute it. And then the deadline is just the finished product. For larger things, I do like to be involved with how they're thinking about it, making sure that's aligned with broader strategies.
Yeah. I find there's also something that I think really just kind of comes from experience, which is you develop a sense of technical taste. And sometimes you'll be hearing a recommendation or some trade-offs, and you'll just kind of wonder, like, that seems a little strange. And so I sometimes find that you just have to pay attention to what your experience is telling you.
Yeah, I really like how you describe it as technical taste because I do think that having been in the industry for over 2 decades, right, there is a lot of input from your experiences that you've received that makes that twitch, that reaction, that quick reaction finely tuned, right? And one of the things that I've tried to do as I've started to manage other leaders or coach other leaders is to figure out how to articulate that taste, which can be so hard.
I totally know what you're talking about. I found a lot of my biggest failures have been either in not listening to my gut concerns or not being able to articulate it very well. Yeah, I've run into that a number of times.
Yeah. Yeah, you just know there's a smell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like this contrasts with this meme about technical leadership, which is like the hands on technical leader that is kind of doing everything themselves. And in some ways, that's like, I think it's a very prevalent idea of how technical leadership should be done. And a lot of people do it just because they think that's how it's supposed to be. I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on that other model.
Yeah, I mean, my experience has been you see a lot of like 10x engineers turned into managers. I think there's a time and place for that. Certainly, if you're in a company long enough, you will often see some of the founding engineers who made most things happen, who got things off the ground, start to move into leadership roles. For some, that can be a great kind of transition for them in terms of unlocking soft skills that maybe they didn't know they had and opening their eyes to opportunities, solving problems that don't involve ones and zeros, right? But for just as many others, it's not the right fit. And I think that takes some time to unravel. And especially when you're working at a company that has legacy and that has that type of history, there is this trust and admiration for those pioneering engineers that make it very hard to see that leadership in the people management perspective is not the right fit for them. There's this fallacy that management is a step up from engineering because people don't always see how to have more impact as an engineer in a way that's as visible as when you move into management. So I feel like that contributes to this transition that doesn't quite hit the mark for people. But that's just to say, I feel like you don't know that something is not the right fit for you until you go through it. And one of the nice things that I've seen in a lot of companies where ICs move into people management roles is the opportunity to go back. Often there's this 90-day period where you can try it out, which I think is great. But then you also have these other memes like visionary oracle memes of leaders where they are expected or should see all this future stuff and that's what they're good at. And those types of leaders too can do well depending on the needs of the organization at the time, or they can completely collapse because they don't know how to turn that vision into action. Right. Yeah. So the whole meme thing is really interesting to me. And I've found working with my peers that I get along with best the chameleon type of engineering leader who adapts to their environment. And so if at some point they are needed in setting technical vision or doing hands-on work, that they can do that, but they understand when it's appropriate to do so.
I think that is a wonderful framing for this.
Yeah, I will say I probably transitioned through many of the different memes through the evolution of my career in engineering leadership. There's that people first guru,
Yeah.
all of that. And I have settled on this more chameleon type of meme.
Another question I had about technical direction was how do you see it intersect with product direction?
I definitely do not think technical direction should exist in a vacuum. It needs to be integrated with product direction. And sometimes technical vision can dictate product direction, product vision. When you are setting technical direction, when you are prioritizing technical work, that needs to happen in alignment with product vision. You have these stories all the time about we don't have time to do XYZ engineering infrastructure projects because we're always working on product things. So my argument for that would be you either have not been able to articulate why that engineering investment is important for the product or it's not important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's a way in which they're just artificial facets of the same thing. It's all
Mhm.
about, what is this company gonna be like in the future?
I think it helps for there to be some trust relationships between that emerging technical leader and ICs, right? But direction isn't always solution. Like, here's the problem. I'm going to delegate the solution, right? Sometimes it is we need to make an investment in this infrastructure. I think one of the things that I find extremely important is listening. So if you're not working in the code every day, you need to listen to the people that are working in the code every day. And what you may uncover is you may uncover developer productivity issues, you may uncover troubleshooting issues, you may uncover many, many things. And it is critical that you listen to what people are saying about those things. And gathering that information and synthesizing that information helps you become better at understanding what's important. And once you understand what's important, your ability to make decisions around technical direction also become refined.
I'd like to talk about building teams and building culture within an engineering organization. When you think about this topic, what are the type of activities that you're talking about?
One is fostering an environment where people are thriving. One is defining what culture you want to cultivate, right? And that may change over time. Your early stage startup culture may look very different from your enterprise culture. And I think that's okay. I think organizations change and that's fine. But I think it's really important for you to understand what that is and articulate it. I was having a conversation with a new founder, CTO at an early stage startup. He was just starting to begin to build out his engineering team. And one of the things that I was talking to him about was his expectations. Often people don't realize they have expectations of the people that they're working with because it's not codified, because it's internalized for them. And what ends up happening is disappointment. They work with their founding engineer, and their founding engineer is not providing them with XYZ that they were expecting, but it was never presented, these expectations. And so what I started to talk to him about was sit down for a minute. Think about how you operate. Think about how you want someone to make their decisions, what you want them to optimize for, how you want someone to look, and start jotting them down. Start defining what you think your values are as a person that is trying to make an organization successful. It seems like a lot. I've spent time at companies where they spent months to a year on defining their set, but you can whittle it down often into 4 sentences about how you want people to operate, and use that everywhere. Use that in your evaluation rubric. Use it in your hiring criteria. Start designing your interviews to get signal on these values, because that shared set of values smooths things out a ton. And then it contributes to really crystallizing a culture that you want for your organization. The first step really is around figuring out what your value system is. And then from there you have other activities. If part of your values is transparency and clear communications, then model those things. Once you have that core set, make sure that's a lived thing.
Because it's essentially saying this is the deal with this company. This is kind of what you're getting into. And it's nice to be really explicit about that. One thing I struggle with sometimes is that these values often are based on what the founders think is like the way they are.
Mhm.
And so it can reinforce some cultural like sameness. And in the same way that when people hire, like the most common failure mode of hiring, I think, is to just try to hire people that are like you. Like, you want people that think like you. I think subconsciously, a lot of people try to hire people that look like them or act like them. And values can do that too if you're not careful. Values can be kind of complicated sometimes. And I guess like how have you navigated that sort of thing while building a culture within an organization?
Yes. When you are thinking about your values, they should be clear but generic in some ways. And I'll give you an example. One of the values that we thought was most important at the last startup I was working at was move fast and break things.
Hmm.
We were still in product market fit stage. And that to me was a great one sentence
That's
value.
wonderful. It's of like, this is what's important for us right now. It kind of gives you an idea of, yeah, yeah, that's great.
And that's the type of value you're looking for. I think there are coded values certainly that do reflect a culture. And I've been lucky to work at places where I think there was some thoughtfulness that went into creating the values. But I think there is definitely a potential for the values to be a trap and to produce an echo chamber, which is definitely not what you want. I don't know how you do checks on values, honestly. I haven't needed to, but I've also been able to actively participate in building out those values. I've encouraged people to share the values, to ask questions about drafts of the values so that you can start to see if these are clarifying, if these are culturally biased.
I do find that my own bias kind of jumps into it sometimes, and like
I just think
that I shape the culture in ways that it just I think I would like.
I think that's not always a bad thing, right? We were talking about culture, and part of the culture that I like to shape wherever I'm at is one with psychological safety.
Yeah,
And one of the nice things about that emulating is if I start to model vulnerability, if I start to model accountability and acceptance and curiosity, that starts to trickle into the culture. And I found that to be quite a good thing. But you're right. I mean, it isn't always good. And sometimes you do want someone who has a much different leadership style than yourself. And I've had really great experience working with and coaching and mentoring folks that are very different from me in terms of their managers. And I find that compliment so nice. So
absolutely.
I always enjoy teaming up with people and partnering with people. And I think that's the only way I can really get big things done. And when that skill is complementary, and when those skills are complement, I love it. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things I've been thinking about the last couple of years is whether it is possible to have psychological safety in an environment where basically resources are decreasing. So, a company that's doing poorly and is having to do rounds of layoffs and things like that. Have you thought about that at all or had any direct experiences with that?
Not with layoffs, certainly with attrition. And I do think it can be more challenging to maintain a psychologically safe environment. No matter what, as a leader, you will be viewed as the man. One of the things that I've found really helpful is being transparent. So I share my articulation with folks around me, and sometimes that is in sort of larger staff meetings. Sometimes that's during one-on-ones, making sure that people can openly discuss their fears. Often, I will also openly discuss my fears. One of the things I remember someone asking for somewhere I worked was for leadership to talk about what they did wrong. And I think that is a great way to try to maintain psychological safety is to start doing a retrospective on why things happened and what could have been done differently, or could anything have been done differently. Maybe the economic environment at that current time just meant that this was going to happen. So I find that really helpful. When you're working at really big companies, that doesn't happen very much. But I think that is something that can happen at smaller companies. That is something that you as a leader can push for. And if executive leadership does not provide that, then it's definitely something that you can start to formulate yourself, making sure that it is aligned with the message that executive leadership wants to convey as well.
That's great. I love the idea of using retros to basically be vulnerable as a leader and then be like, you can kind of volunteer the things that you think you might have messed up. Like, oh, this part of it might have been because actually I did XYZ. That create a lot of space for other people.
I share my failures all the time,
Okay.
especially with new managers. I share my failures. I tell them, you know, this is how I messed up. This is what I learned from it, and this is how I operate now because of it. And I find that for me also, it's really helpful.
That's awesome. Well, I really want to thank you for your time today. And this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Decoding Leadership. As always, I welcome your questions and feedback. And if you're looking for coaching or advisory help, you can contact me at rubik.com. See you next time.